Well, taking on China through the WTO is one thing. At least it's symbolic. At best, it may result in a solution well and truly down the track. But it's an entirely different proposition to up the ante by seeking military support in the South Pacific region. Now, that's what one US expert on politics and economics in Greater China says Australia needs to consider. Salvatore Babones wants to see the old US First Fleet return to our waters permanently. The Associate Professor at the University of Sydney joins me right now. Salvatore, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show.
I'm very interested to get your take on what China has done in a deal with Papua New Guinea on its south coast to set up some kind of $200 million fishing facility in a place that no one seems to catch fish, which is also only 200 kilometres from Queensland Territory. What are they up to?
Well, and you can see the islands in the strait, from what I understand, from that proposed Chinese fishing facility. But everyone knows it's not a fishing facility, and who knows what it'll even get built. It's clearly meant as a hypothetical dagger pointing at Australia, saying, if you keep upsetting us, we'll keep putting on pressure.
And it is 200 kilometres away from Queensland Territory, so it can be seen to be rather intimidatory. Donald Trump recently made a decision after the election to get the old US First Fleet, which I think did no longer travel in these parts from about 1973. He wanted them back in Southeast Asian waters. He wanted them to frequently visit. Why did he do that, do you think?
Well, it's not just Trump. The Navy's behind it. And the proposal actually is the brainchild of the Secretary of the Navy, Kenneth Brathwaite. It's not my proposal. It's Brathwaite's proposal. It's a pretty well-developed plan to support American allies in the region, especially Australia and India. The intention for the First Fleet is that it would take some of the pressure off the Seventh Fleet. Remember, the Seventh Fleet's based in Yokohama in Japan. It's a long way from there to the Indian Ocean. And yet that Seventh Fleet currently has responsibility for everything from the India-Pakistan border all the way across the international date line. The idea is that a new First Fleet would take the southern half of that territory and give someone else responsibility, and hopefully to have a set of ships in the region. It's meant to be an at-sea fleet, not a home-ported fleet, that would actually patrol the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia.
But your view is this needs to go two steps further. That is, it needs to remain here permanently and also have a land base.
Well, even an at-sea fleet needs somewhere to go to port. And the idea that it will mainly port in Singapore, I think, is fantastical. The Singaporean government does nothing ever to upset China, and this would upset China, believe me, if it were in Singapore. Singapore is also a poor choice from a technical standpoint because they're very crowded waters. China has a habit of using asymmetric tactics, like attacking a multi-billion-dollar guided missile destroyer with a fishing ship, accidentally on purpose, and ramming it to cause millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. You can't put expensive equipment in a crowded sea lane like the Straits of Malacca. Much better to have it somewhere close to the action, but where there's more space. And I think Darwin is probably ideal from that standpoint.
Hang on, but ironically, the port of Darwin is owned by the Chinese.
It is, and that is a problem. Not owned, but leased. Australia, of course, could pull back that port lease, but in any case, a crowded place like Center City, Darwin, is the wrong place for a fleet. Now, people are talking about basing the fleet at a point to developing a new port about 40 kilometers north of Darwin. I think that would be a great idea. Australia, I think, has had the peacetime luxury of having its ships based in center cities, which is something that no serious maritime power does these days. And getting a fleet out in a fresh, a new development somewhere outside of the city would be a great idea.
So maybe we could extend that concept to make it a multinational fleet. This is your argument as well.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. We've recently seen Australia participate in the Malabar naval exercises off the coast of India and the Indian Ocean that combined U.S., Australian, Indian, and Japanese ships, the so-called Quad powers, in a set of naval exercises. There's no reason why a First Fleet has to be any different. It doesn't have to be a U.S. First Fleet. It could be a combined fleet for the region. And it doesn't have to have dedicated ships. You could have ships rotating through. So a number of Australian Navy vessels, Indian Navy vessels, Japanese Navy vessels on and off basis, kind of like the way NATO operates. NATO doesn't have any troops. NATO has troops who circle through for a time. Countries that are members of NATO have troops that participate in NATO exercises for a time, then go home. Well, in the same way, we could see ships coming to this new First Fleet, perhaps based in Darwin, perhaps in Perth, for a time while they work together to patrol the sea lanes.
I understand the logistics. I understand how practical it would be. But the $64 million question is, why would we go down this route?
Well, if it's Australia's question is, does it want to be part of the free world, or does it want to kowtow to China? I think we've seen this year what kowtowing to China has done for Australia. It's time for Australia to strike an independent course. And although people tend to say strike an independent course means cozy up to China, I think very clearly strike an independent course means be part of the free world alliances.
Could this action, or could this positioning of a new fleet in Australia, could that not promote the Chinese to think in military terms?
Well, China's already thinking in military terms. It's China that's militarizing islands in the South China Sea, where it said it was only going to establish weather stations. Now they have military bases. The same thing's going to happen in Papua New Guinea if they get a presence there. It's China that's militarizing the world's oceans. I mean, they've even established a naval presence in the Galapagos Marine Reserve off Ecuador because Ecuador couldn't do anything to stop them. It's China who's militarizing the region. Other countries have a choice: either defend themselves and keep those oceans free, or let them become Chinese seas.
I get the feeling that you think that Australia has been far too apathetic up until now towards China.
I think Australia has been very complacent, and it's accepted a lot of money from China without realizing that there's strings attached to that money. I think it's time for Australia to be thinking about pushing back. Here on the East Coast, who is the Navy in Sydney defending against? That Navy should be up in Townsville, where it's really needed, not here in Sydney, enjoying the coffee bars of Potts Point. And I think in the same way, Australia needs to get serious all around about defending itself, instead of thinking of its military as a luxury.
You make a great deal of sense. I'm glad I had you on the program tonight. Salvatore Babones, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for the invitation.